frequently in our community with parents of young adults is that there's this power struggle that's happened because parents may be communicating a lack of belief, not because they don't believe, but because, to all these other points, they're afraid, they're concerned, they're not sure that they've set them up for success, all these things.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, the podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. It's us. You got us here today, and we're excited because when we're recording this, when this episode is airing, it's going to be a couple of weeks before our annual Back on Track Summit. Mm-hmm. And we're really excited about it. We have a phenomenal group of experts joining us this year. We do a one-day summit every year to focus specifically on what's involved with supporting and or parenting young adults, emerging adults.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's whenever we say that, it's like, okay, so what is a young adult? What I think we're really talking about is kids who are mostly over 18, whether they're ready for college or in college or post-college. I mean,
we're not going to college.
Not going to college or all the things, right? I think we have parents in our community that have kids that are in their 30s that they're struggling with. We have parents who have kids who are like in 18 or 19 that are ready to go off to college or off on their own, and they're struggling with kind of how do I support them long distance. The way that I bottom line it, Elaine, is like they're either adults legally or they're not living with us, right? And so both of those scenarios create enough of a difference in your parenting that it warrants kind of paying attention differently. And that's why we do this event every year. And we do a lot of work both in our small groups and in our community generally to support those of you who are struggling with your young adults. And even if you're not a parent of a young adult, listen in, because if you've got a complex kid, at some point they will be a complex young adult. And you might have some of these same struggles that we're talking about today.
Yeah. So if you haven't already, we really encourage you to register for the Back on Track Summit to get your ticket. It's free. There's a VIP pass where you can get all the recordings to listen at your own, whatever works for you. We really encourage you to tune in for that on July 17th live or get the recordings package. It's amazing. And just as a heads up, some of the guests are going to be Jessica McCabe from How to ADHD and Sasha Hamdani. And I mean, it's just a great lineup of guests. I'm very excited.
Awesome.
And so let's talk about, so what we decided we wanted to talk about today was really kind of teeing up what are the issues and how do we set realistic expectations when we're parenting emerging adults? Because as Diane said, it's a little different, right?
Well, and I think that's the piece of it is it's about setting realistic expectations, but it's about where do I even focus, right? So you were telling a story, and I have a similar story where the parent is like, I want to focus on this. I want to help them get a job. I want to help them figure out what school they're going to go to. I want to help them this, right? So we had come in with an idea of what the focus should be, but their priorities and their focus and their agenda might be completely different than ours is. And that's an important step to take into consideration because they are adults. They do have their own priorities. They have their own areas of focus. And it's important to, again, it's like we want to take that into consideration and treat them with respect and collaboration rather than, if you have a 5-year-old, you can say, this is what we're going to do in a very different way than you can with a 25-year-old.
Right. Well, you can, but you're not going to get quite the same results.
No, you're not.
Well, so let's look at what we're really talking about. There are a lot of things that came up in just that little bit that you were saying, right? Whose agenda is it? Is always a huge topic when it comes to young adults. And then there's this issue of, well, but if they don't seem to have their agenda, then I must push mine because something's got to happen. Something's got to change. So we get lost in whose agenda is it. And then I think as parents, sometimes when we get worried, we revert back to director mode.
Well, and I think that as you're saying that, I'm even thinking about the fact that it's this sort of, do they have an agenda? Are they not yet at a place where do they not feel safe having an agenda? I mean, we talk a lot about this age group getting stuck, right? And so they say, well, I can hear half of your parents going, my kid's agenda is to play video games 24 hours a day, right? So yes, that might be what they're spending their time on, but that may not actually be their agenda. And so they may be in avoidance mode, or they may not know how to do the thing that they really want to do, or they're maybe afraid to hope or dream. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons these kids get stuck, is the word I'm going to use, that they're over here avoiding, they're over here frustrated, they're over here pushing back. No, 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 right? It's a sort of, and so part of this is really creating a space so that we can hear our kids' agenda and be cautious not to, the minute they say, this is what I want, to pounce and say, oh, great, you want to get a job? Here's
Make
this
that happen.
what you need to do, and you can do it this week, and I'll help you, and let's make it happen, right? It's this sort of, you're helping them to identify what their agenda is, and then you're going to figure out what your role is in terms of supporting them, in terms of it, and stepping into that agenda, if that makes sense.
It does. So can we go back a little bit? I think this is our constant theme. Before we start solving the problem, I want to break down what you because there was a lot in what you just said. There are a lot of reasons that our young adults get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen in, you and I both lead groups for parents of young adults or grandparents of young adults.
Right.
And what I've seen, the issue that comes up there a lot is when parents begin to see that because the relationship gets so frayed,
Mm-hmm.
that it's really hard to know what their agenda would be, right? And so a lot of our young adults, if they haven't gone on a smooth trajectory that gets better and better, they can kind of, for lack of a better word, flame out or,
Mm-hmm.
fall out, fall back, whatever you want to call it, for a lot of reasons, right? Very often what happens is they're having a hard time getting back on the horse again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That they've had something that's happened. Maybe they didn't make it through the first try at college. Maybe they lost a job. I was talking to one parent this week who's the kid's really having a hard time going back to apply for another job. And it finally became clear, well, he got fired from the last job and he feels really bad about it. So he's afraid to try.
Well, yeah, no, I'm aware of a client who had a kid in the same situation, and it took him a good 6 months. And I don't want to scare you by the timeline here, but what happens as parents are we're like, okay, wait, you lost a job, time to get another one. Let's get back on the horse. And we have to recognize that there's a process there, and
They have to go
there's
through.
a hit that our self-esteem takes. And remember, these are kids who've had a lot of chances before they're 18 to screw up and underperform, or being perceived as underperforming, or have failures, or get in trouble. I mean, these are often kids who've been stumbling all along. And so to expect them to have a major hit, I mean, transparently, I didn't get fired from a job until I was well in my 40s. And it took me quite a bit to recover from that, because like as humans, we have challenges with a fear of failure and all of this stuff that's part of normal human nature. And we're in there without the emotional attachment, or our emotional attachment is, I got to get this kid to get a job so that I'm not financing them for the rest of their life. And so our emotions are competing with what's going on with them emotionally. And so our priorities are different. And I think that that's the piece that I want to take us back to, is the part of the problem is that we do have different priorities. And there's some work there that we'll talk about after the break.
Well, we're not at the break yet. Are we at the break?
No.
Good. Okay. Because so there's a lot of reasons kids get stuck. And what we're speaking to right now is a variety of different self-esteem hits,
Mm-hmm.
right? Struggle with failure, not having quite the resiliency they need, being afraid that they can't, or afraid they won't be able to figure it out. So there's all kinds of ways that shows up. That developmental delay, so that the executive function skills required to do whatever is needed may feel daunting or overwhelming or too much. Yeah, she's raising her
Yeah, I'm
hand.
raising my hand. So just that reminder. So one of the things we teach in our programming is that, these kids are, the language we use with younger kids is they're 3 to 5 years behind their peers. And statistically, the real research shows that they're 30% behind their peers. And so if you've got a 25-year-old,
That gap gets
really
bigger.
means it's like a 7-year gap, right? Not just a 3 or a 5-year gap. And so if your 25-year-old is acting more like a 17 or 18-year-old, they could be right on track developmentally because they've advanced from where they were at 15 or 17 or 19, and they're still not in the same space. And I think, parents are going to, as I say that, people are like, do they ever catch up? And so, Elaine, what's your answer to the question, will they ever catch up?
Well, we get that question. Yes and no.
Mhm.
There are ways to help them catch up, and there are tools to help them catch up. And there are, like, with their buy-in, with their engagement, with their ownership, like when they're ready. And as an adult living with neurodiversity and executive function issues, there are ways in which I may not, quote, catch up, that instead I've learned to manage it, accommodate it, outsource it. Like, I figured out how to deal with the problem for those areas of executive function where I'm always going to struggle with working memory, for example. That's just how my brain is wired. And it's not about catching up on that. It's about learning how to manage it. And I can't do that until I accept that that's a reality for me and understand what it takes to manage it.
So we've got a few reasons why they're stuck. We've got the
And
reality,
there are more.
and there are more. And we've got the reality of developmental delays. We've got the fact that these are separate adults who do have different priorities and agendas than we do as adults. Go.
All right, I got another one. Part of what I think happens that gets them stuck is a disconnect. That we get into power struggles effectively. And if a parent has been holding the reins for too long and is having a hard time letting go of the reins, sometimes the kid gets in, and I say kid could be 19, 24, 28. I'm not talking about age, but our young adults can get into this reaction mode with us. So, and maybe even working against their own best interest, because now it's not about them moving forward. It's about pushing back against our control.
Right.
So another piece I think is really important for us to understand is if, we talk a lot about holding vision and how important it is for parents to see what our kids are capable of so that their kids can see what they're capable of. On the flip side of that, if our kids feel like the parents don't see them as capable and treat them as incapable, then there's almost this self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, then I'm not even going to try. I'm going to show you that I'm not capable, or I'm not even going to push, or forget you. I'm going to go do it on my own. There are a lot of ways that kids will react to feeling like we don't believe in them. And I think that happens frequently in our community with parents of young adults, is that there's this power struggle that's happened because parents may be communicating a lack of belief, not because they don't believe, but because, to all these other points, they're afraid, they're concerned, they're not sure that they've set them up for success, all these things. But if the kid is experiencing it as, you don't believe in me, you don't think I can, you're undermining me, then we get a different kind of stuck and pushback.
Well, and what you're describing in kind of all of these is this reactive pattern that we get into, and again, we talk about this all the time, but reaction doesn't always mean aggressive reaction. It could be blame, it could be avoidance, it could be shutting down, it could be all kinds of things. But there's this reactive pattern that happens, whether it's us reacting because we're scared that they're going to be in our basement till they're 45 years old, or it's them because they feel like we're trying to push an agenda. But there's this reactive pattern that happens that a lot of times will create conflict, which leads to stuck, on top of all the other good reasons we talked about that these kids might be stuck to start with. So is that a good place to take a break?
Great place to take a break.
Do you recognize current ADHD interventions fall short? At Dig Coaching, we have developed a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called Cognitive Ergonomics from the Inside Out. To learn more, visit cognitive-ergonomics.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to this fabulous conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. We're talking about young adults, and up until now, we've been talking about the ways in which they get stuck, or we get stuck, or the obstacles. Some of the obstacles, there are too many to go into detail, but some of the challenges that make it hard for them as young adults and for us as parents to really know how to support them, because either they're feeling deflated, or they're feeling dismissed or undermined, or whatever their feelings are that are leading to these challenges that match our feelings that lead to these challenges. So
Yeah.
a hot mess ensues.
Right. Well, and I think the place that I want to go as we start kind of talking about solutions is that one of the really helpful frameworks for me and for the parents that I'm working with is that when our kids become adults or our kids move out of our house, and those are kind of the two big milestones I was talking about earlier, that it's an opportunity to really redefine our relationship. And if we explicitly say that, I mean, it's hard because we've been parenting all along. I was talking to a parent of an 18-year-old the other day, and they're really struggling. And it's like, and it's not her job in the same way to support him as it was when he was 5, 6, 7, right? And so we really need to figure out how to be in a different role. We were going to jump in.
Well, it's nothing magical happens when they turn 18.
Right.
It's not a magic wand. And yet society tells us everything's different now. And it is. On some level, everything is legally different, at least in the United States. And I think that's true in many countries. But there's this psychological difference. Like I remember one of my kids,
maybe more than us, right?
Yeah, one of my kids thought by turning 18 meant she needed to know how to do her taxes. Like I didn't. That was an assumption she was making. It's not like I communicated it. And so there really is something about understanding that their mindset shifts when they
And it
become a
doesn't
young
always
adult.
happen that way, right? Because some of you are going to have kids who are like very happy to have your help until they're 20, 22.
Until it's
And others who, like, you might have a 16-year-old who's like, stay out of my life, mom and dad, I've got this. But the point is that we get to redefine our role. I mean, I think about even my 40-year-old, and it's like every once in a while I'll watch myself fall back into some of the habits and patterns that I had when he was, young, much younger, living with me. And it's hard to rewire. But the reason so the framework I want to introduce is that if you need to change the role, to be able to articulate what the role is, if it's not the traditional parent-child relationship, right? Because you may now be the landlord. You may now be the roommate. You may now be
the employer.
the bank, the employer, the whatever, right? And I think that this is helpful framework for a couple reasons. One is it helps us to separate from the traditional, I'm the mom and dad and I have the authority as a mom and dad, to something that they might legitimize in a different way. I think about when my kid moved out and started having roommates, they'd have a roommate meeting once a week and they'd talk about what it was like to live together, and you're leaving your dishes and you're never flushing the toilet or whatever the problem in the apartment was. And they might see that in a very different way than you have to clean your room because I'm your parent kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's so key. And this is the case whether we're living in the same home with them or not.
Yeah.
What you're speaking to is that our role shifts, and we need to begin to pay attention to how are we communicating with them differently, how are we setting expectations differently now that they're moving into a different role. And in another podcast, we talk about designing conversations, and there's a lot of opportunity as they become young adults to design with them about what we are going to continue to do or take care of or support and what we're not. Oftentimes we do that, like when they hit driving age, we may be very clear about we're going to pay for the car and we're going to pay for the insurance and you're going to pay for your gas and, and you're going to be home by X time. And, we're in that, we're accustomed to knowing what agreements look like as they become young adults. There's, I think, an initial sense of, well, we shouldn't have any agreements because I'm an adult. And then we step back into, okay, but we're still in relationship with each other.
I mean, it's okay to have an agreement, and you want it to be a collaborative agreement. So we can put a link into that podcast as well. I think it's number 44, Elaine.
You know the number?
I do on that one. It's one of the ones I always encourage people to go listen to. Is like, how do we even set an agreement? What should the agreement be? It's a great, but it's a process, right? It's a sort of, what should our agreement be around keeping the house neat as a family? What should the process be for keeping each other up to date around when we're coming and going and we're going to be out of town or we're going to be late or whatever? I mean, there's all of these sorts of things that and having these agreements really push us to two things: collaborate in a different way and pull us out of some of the old patterns and habits, because I think that that's one of the things that's going to be important to our kids is that they see that we get that we're still not the boss of them in the same way that we were when they were 15.
Well, and I guess the question I want to pose to the parents listening is, do you see that you're not the boss of them anymore?
Even if they live in your house.
Even if they live in your house and that you're paying the rent or the tuition or, whatever it is, that you may want to be. And if what you really want is for them to begin to take agency over their own life and to pick up the baton of their own life, then that if you haven't been collaborative up until now is the time to be collaborative. And to do that, and this is what shows up in the young adult parent groups all the time, I'm sure it is for yours as well as mine. To do that, we really have to go back to leaning into the relationship. And you started this by saying it's about creating new relationships, redefining how we're going to be in relationship with these kids as a young adult, with the assumption that they have their own agency, they have their own way of doing things. We may not always agree with it. In fact, we probably won't always agree with the decisions they make. But can we be in alignment with them around how we're communicating with each other and how we're supporting each other in whatever it is that they are doing?
Well, it's really funny. I'm talking about we had family together over the weekend, and we were talking about my parents about something, and I was reflecting on the fact that one of the hardest times in my life growing up, and now I'm 60, and so there's lots of years behind me, was the 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
You remember.
Between college and my first job that I moved back home and lived with my parents.
Oh.
So I'd finished college and I didn't yet have a job. I was looking for a job. I was living with my parents, and it was painful. And I don't think my parents were not the under our house, under our roof,
Those are our rules
kind of parents. I mean, they definitely were more conservative in terms of the way they like things to be run, but they weren't that strict. But it was still this sort of, I'm supposed to be an adult. I want to be an adult. I want to be independent. I'm living with my parents. I'm trying to exist.
I've been living on my own for the last 4 years or whatever.
Yeah, in college, right. So this is hard for them. I think is the piece that I want to take out of that. This is hard for them.
Yeah.
And if we can acknowledge that and really try to put ourselves into their shoes, not just to see the obvious, but look at some of the other stuff that might be going on underneath it for them. Our job is about helping them unearth their agenda and not about helping them
pushing ours.
Pushing ours. Thank you for clarifying. Yes. Right. It's just sort of, what did you always say, wanting for them instead of from them.
Yeah, exactly. So I was in a group this week with parents of young adults or parents and grandparents in that group. And one of the parents was talking about they've got a son who stepped out of college, didn't go well the first round, is kind of getting ready to go back, is nervous, has been living at home. And the parents really want him to get a job so that he'll have money when he goes back to college. Mm-hmm. And this kid is really resisting getting a job. And what the parents realized yesterday is that they were only wanting him to get a job because they wanted him to have some structure this summer and to be doing something. And when they realized it wasn't actually about the job, it was about, we could have a conversation with him about, what are you going to do this summer? How do you want to use the summer? Because the kid's really nervous about going back to school. And so when it shifted from, it's not the solution, get the job, but it's, let's be in the process of figuring out how to support him and getting ready for going back to school and getting back on that horse now that he's doing it, but he's nervous about it. It opened up all kinds of possibilities. They shifted the perspective, and then they could see different ways to support him that wasn't just about, well, he's got to get a job because that's what we think should.
That's what people do when they're 21 years old, is they get a job, right?
Right.
And I remember it's like this sort, I'm sure I even did this to my kids. It's either you need to be in school or you need to have a job. And the invitation is like, what is it about that? Right? It's a sort of, why is that important? Well, I want them to be feeling like they're productive. Okay, so there's lots of things that they could do to be productive. They could have a volunteer job. They could be creating content and things online. They could be writing a book. They could be, there's all kinds of things these kids could be doing to be productive. And ultimately, we want them to figure out what their thing is, because that's the sustainable part of it, not just getting them to do what we think they should do.
Well, and you just said to be productive, and remember that that's a value that some of us have, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we should be busy and doing. And, sometimes our kids may share that. My kid has a tendency to say, you guys make life way too hard. What if you could make it easier? And he doesn't want to be working all the time. And there's a part of me that looks at him as like, I can learn something from that. It's not that he doesn't want to work, but it's not the same value. He wants a work-life balance or life-work balance differently. And that's a reasonable value for him to have, and for me to respect that. And I think this generation typically is more likely to say, I'm working so that I can live my life instead of my work is my life.
Yeah.
And it's changing for this generation. And our job is to kind of see what's in it for what's going on for them and support them on their journey instead of making their journey look like what we think it should look like.
Well, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking about journey, right? It's this sort of, which goes back to this sort of, we want them over here with a job, but they may be getting unstuck so that they can start dreaming, so that they can start planning, so that they can start taking action, so that they can get the job.
Right. And
that
stay there.
Take time and stay there and make it sustainable. So how do we wrap this up, Elaine?
I don't know. There's a lot here. And I know some of you are listening and thinking, well, what do we do? Right. And I guess what I want to say is, we have a lot of conversations about this with parents in our community, because so much of it is about relationship and conversations and how you're having these conversations. So check out the podcast episode 44 on setting agreements. I can't remember what the other one was, but I'll go back and figure it out if you remember.
You don't.
And really, the place I want to invite you to look, I just said this to the group this week, is our job as parents is to be an invitation to them, is to invite them to step into their own life, not direct them to, not expect them to, but invite them and be a safe place to support them in stepping back into the journey. To remember that some of them are having a hard time with that it's feeling daunting for them. And instead of expecting them through it or demanding them through it, if we can invite them to and support them through it, we will help them find a path that's the right path for them.
And we want to, and as you're saying that, it's like this sort of, we want to set realistic expectations. And the reminder is these kids are 30% behind their peers. And so they may not look the same at 25 or 30 as their peers that have finished college or are out there with jobs. And so you want to stretch them and challenge them to the next level of independence and manage your frustration that they're not where you wish that they would be, so that you can problem solve and partner with them.
Yeah, that's what we talked about in this group yesterday too, is like, this is the space to do your work, to take your emotionality out of it, so that when you're over there with him, you're present to him and his needs, and you're not bringing your worry and your anxiety into it. So I guess that's the other thing is, do your work, whether it's here or somewhere. As parents, we got to bring our energy out of it so that we can be present to them and meet them where they are now.
Awesome. So
Super.
Take a minute as we close and reflect for yourself. Is there a nugget? Is there an insight? Is there something you want to do differently based on what you've heard us talking about today?
And as always, friends, thank you for what you're doing for yourself, by being here and tuning in, for your kids, by thinking consciously about how you want to be as a parent. It makes a huge difference. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.